regulars on this show. They are so popular. And when they come on, we have so many questions that we'll never get to, but you guys get to have consults with either of them. And that's the greatest thing about the world we live in today. Their names are Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Howk. You can find them at esteemdynamics.com, and you can even join up for their group. They do special things like this just for the members. It's like $3 a month, less than a Starbucks, and it's absolutely fantastic. Please welcome back to the show my two favorites. I'll just say it, Dr. Jen Howk and Dr. Doug Lisle. Thanks for coming back.
Great to see you.
Yeah, you guys are so positive. I was saying right before the show that the reason I was a couple minutes late is because I was having a bad hair day, and Jen said, "No, I'm having a good hack day." See, so look look how great she is. She's just totally reframed it for me. So we get so many questions. We'll jump into them, and I think you'll like today's questions because they're not all about weight loss and the pleasure trap. These are they seem like the questions that you often get on the Beat Your Genes podcast, and we have everything from infidelity to flatulence. So let's get started. Yeah, the first question is from Candace. She says, "Dear doctors, is it possible for people to get stuck in grief? And if so, are there resources to help them bounce back? I have 3 girlfriends who suffered significant losses, a mother, a spouse, and a child. These took place well over 5 years ago, and they're still grieving. They cry almost every day and seem to be unable to move on with their life. When you talk to them, it's as if the loss occurred yesterday. Is this normal? And how do we help people that seem to be unable to move forward after a loss?"
There's a lot we could say about this, so let me just give a few things, and we'll see what Jen wants to fill in. There's huge individual differences in how people not only respond to grief generally, but how they respond to a specific loss particularly. So I've had animals that when I lost them, it was a rough few weeks. I've got one now that it's going to be a bad couple of years. Okay, so that it matters a lot on what it is lost. Also, and then individual differences. So Alan, if Alan lost his favorite pet, he might have 3 or 4 bad hours. He might. Whereas maybe not, probably not.
I think that's a record for how early we get an insult in against Alan. Like we're 6 minutes in, and it's like throw Alan under the bus.
That's right. So individual differences, individual situations. Sometimes if things persist for a long period of time, there could be multiple reasons. One of them can be that the mind can't quite figure out. It feels like a loss that might have been avoidable. And so the mind basically, remember, thinking and sleeping are actually actions of the mind. So for example, when people go to sleep, they don't just go to sleep and lose consciousness. The brain is actually running a cost-benefit analysis on whether or not we should sleep. So it's not a conscious choice, it's an unconscious calculation. If you get up in the middle of the night, 8 nights in a row, and feed yourself a peanut butter sandwich, you better believe that you'll wake up on the 9th night because you've conditioned the organism to believe that it's worth waking up. And it knows that when you're asleep, okay? So in the same way, the organism runs a cost-benefit analysis on what it ruminates about. So it's ruminating, if it's ruminating about a loss, it's ruminating about a loss because it's running a cost-benefit analysis that it's worth ruminating. And so that's why it's doing it. So it's not like it's a choice that is mysteriously visited upon the creature. It's in fact a cost-benefit analysis that has a rationale, or the mind wouldn't be determined that it was worth doing it. So that very often happens when there's something about this loss that feels like we don't understand something about it, and we don't understand why it happened. We don't understand what we could have done to avoid it. It seems like there might have been something to avoid it, etc. Okay, so that's one reason why people will persist in grief, is because the mind thinks, you know what, you've got something to learn about this loss. It was a major loss, and therefore it's worth us spending a lot of time and energy thinking about it so that we don't have something similar happen in the future. Okay, so that's one reason why people persist in grief. There are other reasons. They can be avoiding the challenge of replacing what was lost for various and sundry reasons, and they and therefore they're intimidated by the challenges that could be involved there, etc. So those are some things that come to mind for me, and so that's why you have counsel in the world to sometimes tease those things out and see whether or not they can be brought to a resolution, and the person can make enough peace that the mind quiets down its rumination. Okay. Jen, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add other than, in some cases, sort of these things can all interact. So people can get in this sort of loop where they're like Doug is just saying, they're avoiding the challenge of replacing what was lost, which means that can come from a place of feeling like you're dishonoring the memory of the person or the animal, or you're just it's some sort of insult to the person to move on. So that's often where it starts. But what can sometimes happen with certain personalities is they get a certain benefit from the social act of the grieving. So there's a lot of positive feedback from the social community, from friends and family, that gives them some status that they didn't otherwise have. And people can get a little hooked into that, and they can perseverate on their grief because it gives them sort of a visibility and a status that they didn't have before. So that's not certainly, maybe we don't know what's happening in the case that you're talking about, but that is, I have been in that position before with, all I want to talk about is my terrible breakup, because I get a lot of attention and a lot of positive feedback, and oh my God, that's so unfair, and I can't believe that happened to you. And it's easy to get into those sorts of loops, especially if you're also avoiding moving on for other reasons, and you kind of plaster the story on top of it. So that's the dark side of perpetual grieving.
That AJ, you just saw why this is my colleague. This is she's always covering ground that I don't think of, and filling in the blanks. Fabulous, Jen. Thank you.
Well, it's sort of like you're the hot fudge sundae and she's the cherry on top.
I'm the whole food plant-based.
Yeah. And now I have to look up the word persever, whatever that word was. Perseverate. I have to look that up because I don't know what that means.
That's
I'm
in
always
the loop.
looking up her words. Don't feel bad about it.
Basically means obsessing, going over and over and over, being stuck.
I mean, I know you guys see patients for different reasons, but if somebody is stuck in this, like, is that something you've ever worked with people on if they wanted to have a consult?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Nice. Good.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know.
Usually, it's a combination, just to really it's usually all of these things. There's a genuine mourning process. You lost something very significant. You're trying to make sure that doesn't happen again. You're trying to figure out what went wrong. How do I prevent it? And then you just accidentally start to get some social processes and some interpersonal dynamics that change, that move you in the direction of, oh, I like that. That feels good. And it's all these intersecting cost benefit analyses that the animal just always wants to do the best thing for its survival, and being receiving a lot of feedback from members of the community, even for that sort of reason, can be a good signal of survival.
That's so interesting, because people don't really teach you how to grieve growing up,
No, it emerges from your personality in large part.
And saying to somebody, get over it, generally isn't helpful.
No.
Even though Alan's tried that many times.
Yeah. My father was a big fan of handle it. Just handle it.
Oh my goodness.
All right.
Okay, great. Well, this is a really interesting question, because I've often wondered this myself. This is from Anonymous. Could you please explain to me why so many women stay with scumbag husbands who repeatedly cheat on them? I have 2 girlfriends whose shithead husbands continually have affairs, sometimes long-term ones with actual girlfriends, sprinkled in with the occasional visit to paid prostitutes who are not being screened for sexual diseases. One of the women is in her 50s and the other one is in her 60s. And all they do is cry and bitch and moan and complain about this to me and each other. They say they are devastated and so unhappy. So why do they stay? Do they really love these assholes? In one case, there are no children involved. In the other case, the child has already left home. Is it simply because of resources and not wanting to go back to work? Is someone who has high self-esteem and self-respect, would they put up with this?
Coin flip. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I can tackle some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So the number one reason that they're likely to be sticking around is resources. That they again, everything, you always start with the cost benefit analysis, as we talked about with the grieving example. And so if these women are not super financially secure, or they're not inferring that they could be completely secure independent of the husband, then that's going to be the number one reason that people stay with we heard scumbag, shithead, and asshole. So we got all the categories covered here. So even if they are financially secure, they will stay for other reasons. And you're giving a little clue in the answer that's, we just talked about with the grieving question, which they are bitching and moaning to their girlfriends a lot. So that's another example of like they're running a cost benefit analysis where there's a big cost associated with filing for divorce and getting out of that relationship and moving out and finding a place and finding a new set of friends. And it's a big process if you're in your 50s and 60s. You're also running the cost benefit analysis on the likelihood of finding another relationship, which is sometimes not a very positive one. So all things equal, there's greater benefit. There's more energy conservation in just putting up with the crap, sitting in the unpleasant relationship and sort of optimizing it as best as you can, which includes getting a lot of social status from being the victim in this situation and getting the social feedback and the sort of false status that accompanies that kind of social process. If the cost of leaving the relationship is high enough that you're very unlikely to act on it, but you still want to get some status and you still want to sort of optimize your circumstances, that's going to be an equilibrium that is pretty common to a lot of certain types of personalities are more likely to find themselves in that situation. They're maybe a little more disagreeable. There are a lot of things that could be going on, but that's my dog is talking in the background there. So those would be the main things that I would look at. You just always want to consider that it's a lot harder to leave, especially if there are kids involved and you've been there for a really long time. And people are running all kinds of analyses that you just can't see. They may have other reasons for staying there that you don't know. There could be all kinds of things going on, and we never have as full a window into someone else's relationship as we think we do. So those are all the things I would throw at that question. I'll see what Doug has to add. Motown wanted to participate as well.
Totally. Think of a person's mind as the United States in a presidential election year. Okay, it's got 150 million ideas, both going different directions. Okay, so and the bottom line is that the decision, incredibly, you got to go one of two ways. And that decision can be decided by an eyelash. That's how that happens. And so that literally, it can be just by chance. It can be just a tiny bit too expensive psychologically and just enough votes say stay, even though there's an incredible amount of other votes on the other side saying leave, okay? And so you're just like, God, I can't believe it. This is decided by this much. And it's like, that's exactly how this works. And there can be tremendous pressure on both sides of a decision. And sometimes it can also be remarkably stable, so that there can be huge pressure on both sides. But if those pressures are equal, the person stays right where they are. What's interesting is what I do with folks is for me to find out where those pressures are. What I do is I do thought experiments. And I say, for example, okay, well, suppose your Aunt Millie, okay, you didn't know was rich. Turns out that she doesn't have any kids, and she just died in Omaha and left you, her heir, to a trust fund that pays $250,000 a year tax-free municipal bonds cash. Now, do you stay in the relationship? And when I've asked that question, a significant percentage of women say, I'd be out of there in 5 minutes. Okay, so it's like, okay, now I know where the pressure is. And so that pressure, as Jen talks about, can be, for example, it isn't that they're not competent, it isn't that they don't have self-esteem, it's that they that they are uncertain that they could actually replace that financial security. And usually you never can, because the truth is that if you walk away from a spouse, at 55 years old, you could say, well, I've got it all set up and we've got this all, it's all going to be okay. Yes, but you know that your health may deteriorate. You could be in tough circumstances, and 2 years from now, you could come down with cancer. And there's something extremely reassuring about being married and being sort of locked into a relationship where there's two people surviving. So that's part of the in sickness and in health is it's sort of an indemnification against tragedy. And so when you walk away from a marriage, one of the things you feel is you're walking away from a major insurance policy. So even if the person is cheating on you and being complete ass, the truth of the matter is they're still married to you. They haven't filed. And there's a tremendous amount of social and legal support for them to come to your aid if you're in serious trouble, okay? And even though you may not think about that consciously, that's part of that big force that is keeping you in place right where you are. It's your sheer personal safety. Not to mention all the other things Jen talks about. I mean, there's a whole host. So as we would argue, we're never quick to judge the fact that from the outside, from our perspective, we say, you're healthy, you got a lot of life ahead of you, you're going to be fine financially. What the hell are you doing? And the truth of the matter is, you can't judge what that personal mind, all the way that they subjectively judge their whole existence. There's no way that you can do it. All you can hear is you can hear the cognitive dissonance, okay? Just like you can hear the cognitive dissonance in an election. You got like the mind of the country is in tremendous dissonance. Well, people's minds are in dissonance over these decisions, and it can be puzzling why it is that they answer, why their decision is the way it is. But that's because there's great forces pushing both directions.
Another, just to kind of this again touches on both the questions, but yeah, all of that is so true. And part of why they are social, they're bitching and moaning about it to you all the time. And it's very frustrating to you to be on the other side of that, because you're giving them very good advice about, you should leave, you could stay with me, you can sleep in my guest room, I'll be there to support you. They are in part, sometimes, not necessarily, but likely, part of the obsession with processing it with their social community could be that they are looking for that evidence to tip the balance just slightly. Yes. Like if you were their friend and you are enough of an alternative insurance policy that it suddenly makes it possible for them, and they're not consciously aware that this is going on. They're not like actively seeking, they're not making the pro and con list and weighing it all out. But there could be this sort of moment where you say something or you just give them enough unconditional feedback that shows them that you are supportive enough that they're willing to make the leap out of there. That can be a very frustrating process, because again, you don't have a window into that. You can't see that that's going on for them. From your perspective, they just loop around and around and around, and they say the same thing. And I've heard this story, and I know the guy's an asshole, and why don't you leave? But that could be part of what's going on too.
Yeah, I have to say that sometimes this is really entertaining, because sometimes in counseling over the last 25 years, I've actually gone through this process with people and had the sentence that actually tipped the balance. And I've watched it right in front of me, okay? Yeah. When I've said things like, well, so worst case scenario, can you live with your mother? It's like, oh, yes, I could. But like, well, what the hell? I had to go home and live with my mother a time or so. What's the difference? And just by having the attitude that that's no big status loss, that's no big deal, that status loss is transient and therefore not judged by a solid member of the community as any big deal, was enough to say, fine, then I can do it. Like suddenly the massive cost benefit analysis winds up suddenly tipping 51-49, and now they can take action. So this is, I'm looking for those kinds of things. I'm trying to find out where are they so unsure, and where are they so disturbed over their calibration of what the losses are going to be on one or the other side of the equation. And so I'm poking around trying to find out where those things are. Sometimes we can find it, okay? Sometimes we can't. Sometimes it's so unconscious and complex that there is no one thread that is holding the secret to that string. So, but sometimes there is, and when you find it, it's marvelous to watch it. It's like a bunch of dominoes all going one direction. So that's how that works.
This is really interesting, and I could really see how a session, if somebody was in this predicament, could help. I just always wonder, why do the guys want to stay? I mean, I just always feel bad for women in this situation because they seem so, it really hurts them.
Yeah, it's life's got some tough boxes, AJ. Sometimes they're just flat out tough. Yeah.
Well, darn.
Yeah.
Hate to break it to you.
Okay. That's what my mom always said growing up. My mom used to say, life is unfair. And to that, I would say, well, that in itself is unfair. So, okay. So the next question's from a guy. I love when guys write in because they're just not afraid to just tell it like it is. So Justin says, my girlfriend and I have a pretty solid relationship. The only thing we really fight about is my farting. She says when I fart in front of her, it's disrespectful and I should go into the other room. I say she should think of it as a compliment that I feel comfortable to fart in front of her. It would be very inconvenient for me to have to get up from the couch every time I have to fart.
Ben, God forbid. That settles that.
Well, it depends what you're watching, I think. He goes, I feel this is a natural and normal bodily function, and I don't understand what the big deal is.
That's really interesting. Now, I've never had such a question before. And this is the first time that my mind has actually even started to look at it. I mean, the first thing that leaps to mind is your personality on this issue, and then possibly socialization. But yeah, what are you thinking, Jen? What's going on?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it's primarily personality, but my lifetime of data collection on this question is that there is a major gender difference here. and there is some socialization. There is sort of a I have never, well, I don't want to say never, but most women do not just let it rip while watching a movie or while hanging out. They're gonna absorb it. They're gonna go in another room. They're not going to have this kind of interaction. And most men are like, what is the problem? It's a normal bodily function. And most women are bothered by it. So this is totally, there is a major gender divide here. And I think a lot of it is, this is actually one of the rare things that comes down to a socialization process that people grow up with that is modulated by personality. So somebody who's much more agreeable, even being a male raised in this culture, if you're a super agreeable male, particularly if you're under rewarded or you're over rewarded in the relationship. So you're sort of feeling like you're on thin ice all the time and you don't want to offend the other person because you don't want to send them running away from you. They're going to be more careful about that kind of thing. So that would be another part of that dynamic. But yeah, this is I have known many friends who have struggled with this. Many men who don't understand.
I had a male friend say that his girlfriend must be paying someone in Indonesia to do it for her because.
My favorite was I used to live in the actual Bay Area, so in Berkeley, and I dated a lot of like Buddhist guys. This was in my Buddhist period, and so there was one guy that I actually called at the time. This was before I knew about behavioral genetics, but I called him the disagreeable Russian because that was who he was, and he was very deep in his lineage, and he did his 90-minute sadhana every morning, and we went camping once, and farting next to you on the couch while watching a movie is one thing, but doing it in a tent is quite another thing. And he was just letting it go. And at some point I'm finally like, could you please just go outside? And he's like, oh, well, I'm really sorry if that offends you, but that's just your reality construction. You have figments that you're projecting into reality because we're all just energy and this isn't really happening, but your offense is part of your karma. So that's one approach to it.
Your reality is that you're leaving.
Yeah, that relationship did not last much longer. if you're gonna do that to me in a very small 2-person tent, like, you're not long for this world. Yeah.
I have actually a more general comment about this. My internet may not be stable, so let me know. But and that is that there's a correct compromise. And so let me explain to you what the correct compromise is on many things. So if two people are very one of them's very neat and the other one's more of a slob, the correct compromise is for the slob person to become neat. It is not to be in the middle, okay? Because the slob is literally noxious. In other words, the slobbiness is noxious, but being neat is not noxious to the slobby person. It's just effort, okay? So that's the, if one person is fastidious about and concerned about saving, and the other person's a spendthrift, then the right thing to do is to, as much as possible, divide the finances. But where there are joint decisions, it's to be frugal, because it's no big problem for the in other words, you're better off frugal fundamentally. So this is the way to compromise is the way in the manner of prudence and effort. That's actually fair, okay? So if you are the person that is sitting on that side of the personality, then and the same thing would be true with food, okay? So in other words, the person that wants to eat crap can go eat crap somewhere else. It's not a problem. Just it's nothing but hassle to you. You want to go eat a cheeseburger, go have it. But we're not having it here in this house. Okay, we're not having the stuff that's going to compromise my ability to do this well. So the correct compromise here is get off the couch and don't irritate your partner, for God's sakes. Okay, that's that would be the reasonable compromise is that direction, not the other direction. Okay, so when we look at the solution to the conflict of interest is effort rather than noxiousness, then the correct thing to do is for somebody to not be lazy and go to the effort to reduce the noxiousness. So that's how I look at what I call the correct compromise, because people are confused about that. Why, doesn't bother me any, why shouldn't we just compromise somewhere in the middle? Because looking at your sloppy mess and having it all over my house is actually really disturbing to my mind. When I clean it up beautifully, you love it. Okay, so therefore that's what I call that process. Jen, thoughts on that? That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a point at which, this is where this is the CB on the relationship can shift if you're insisting on that kind of that sort of tilt, because you might be dealing with a very distorted personality who is, if you have a neat freak, who is like sort of disproportionately bothered by a small mess, then that's just that's what you're dealing with. That's the nature of the relationship. So if the sort of the more disturbed person carries the day, if you adhere to that as the decision rule, it may shift the CB on the entire relationship. And I think a lot of people, for various reasons, the dynamics of the relationship, they're not willing to do that. And so the sort of more disturbed person just lives with the simmering disturbedness. So that's very common. The only other thing I would add to the flatulence question is that I don't think men appreciate how sexually unattractive it is. So that might tip your CB as well. If you're sort of like, oh, what's the problem? Well, there's a problem in that she may not be as interested in activities that you might be interested in later on. So keep that in mind. Yeah. So the female nervous system is a delicate thing.
Yes. That makes perfect sense. Sure.
That's very astute. Would your answer be the same if it was belching?
Yeah, same thing. I think it's maybe a little less. Well, I don't know. That would be an individual personality basis thing. But I think any sort of there's sort of there's a signal of low conscientiousness that accompanies it. There's sort of I think there's a little of the feeling that the female nervous system gets is a little sort of like similar for both of those things.
And also a possible lack of control over the bodily problems.
Yeah,
It's
there's
almost
something about it that is like that conveys that for sure.
yeah, a little
Yeah.
conveyance of physiological and mental compromise,
Mm-hmm.
even modestly. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost evidence of some dysfunction. You know.
Yeah, I think I saw a meme from the great and powerful Jordan Peterson the other day that said a good man is not a well-behaved man. A good man is a tortured man who has it under control. So sort of this idea, he's tapping into, like, I have a lot of quibbles with that interpretation, but I do think there is something about masculinity that in its sort of archetypal form that is like controlled aggression. This kind of like I have my animal nature sort of dialed in, and I'm not like just I have it channeled in an appropriate direction. And there's something about the letting loose of the bodily function that is a little bit of slippage around that. So that could be disturbing to a lot of women.
Really good thinking. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
You know, it's I wish it could just be okay for everybody to fart and belch, because I'm hosting this GI Health Summit, and so many people, it's not on purpose. You know, they're not doing it to be mean or funny. Sometimes people with certain GI conditions, they can't help it. I wish we could just normalize these things.
Yeah, well, of course, if that's what you're dealing with, and that's a separate. I've seen both versions, where it's sort of there's a degree at which it becomes performative. There's an exaggerated kind of like there's a performative aspect to it that is different than somebody who is, you know, captive by a GI situation where they need to express themselves. That's
performative is almost as good of a word as perverse, whatever that other word you said. So I like it. I like it. That's
the
great.
Word of the day.
So Jessica watching live said that farting is negative foreplay.
There you go.
Yeah. I think for a lot of women, that's very true. And
Nice.
I would assume for a lot of men too. I would assume that, you know, I don't have the egocentric bias from the male perspective, but I think a lot of women keep that sort of thing to themselves because they're perceiving that it would be sexually unattractive. So whether or not that's true, I think that is I mean, Doug can fill in, but I think that that's going to be part of the dynamic a lot of the time.
Well, speaking of sexual unattractiveness, you're going to love this question from Cam. Dear doctors, do you think it's wrong if pets stay on the bed during sex?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a little, I don't know. For me, it would be weird.
It'd be weird.
That's my first take, but I'm sure this is individual differences, obviously.
Yeah.
Maybe it depends what the pet is. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much.
It just seems logistically more fraught with peril, and also, like, why do you want an audience?
Great example of the correct compromise.
Yes.
Okay. Correct compromise is that if one of the two people says, "Listen, I'm not comfortable with it," then that's it. The correct compromise is no pet. Yeah.
I love this idea of the.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I love this idea of the correct compromise, and especially how you put it towards people that have, you know, struggle with food. I think it's just, I've never heard you phrase it like that, and I think it's great. So if somebody has two dogs, the correct compromise would be just keeping one dog on the bed.
Obviously.
Yeah. All right. What else we got?
Okay, so here we go from Lynn. There we go. Dear doctors, I'm a health coach, and I'm wondering if there is such a thing as a victim mentality. It seems that most of the women I work with have this poor me, pitiful pearl mentality where everything bad happens to them and they're constantly attracting bad people and situations into their lives. Can this cycle ever really be broken, and how can I help them?
Well, you just wandered into the genius of Dr. Jen Howk and her work for 10 years. And so the answer to that question is beyond the scope of this discussion right now. It's certainly one that will be painted out here over the next year. But if Jen can give us the tiniest of synopsis just to answer the question, I think that's probably the right thing to do for now. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have already touched on sort of some of the central components in both the questions about grieving and why people don't leave relationships. The thinking here is that there's always people, you've got to look at people from the perspective of their individual difference. So their personality is going to drive a lot of how they see the world and the options that they perceive is available to them to deploy to get what they want in life. So you've got to look at personality first, and then you look at the strategies that are available to people to optimize their lives. And so when you have somebody who is sort of prone to feeling a little disagreeable, feeling a little victimized. We all know people who kind of have just a little more of that in their personality than other people. A lot of it just has to do with baseline optimism. So we talk a lot about optimism as being a function of agreeableness more than anything else, agreeableness and openness. And so if you've got somebody who's not very optimistic, they're kind of an Eeyore in general, that's their personality. That's just genetically who they are. And a lot of those people will fall into these dynamics that I was talking about earlier, where they stumble across some social payoffs, some interpersonal payoffs from doing a lot more complaining and a lot more whining about their lives than maybe they otherwise might if they were forced to kind of just suck it up. So if they're around people who are, you know, giving them an audience and giving them some social status in response to their complaining, that is going to become more incentivized over time, just because they already have that, they have that chip in their personality to begin with. So it gets a little exaggerated, and they will find more opportunities to use it. So I think it is fair to say that there are some people who are more prone to that than others. I think everybody can get into sort of a pessimistic, complaining state. I'm a very optimistic, agreeable person. I have been an Eeyore in my life before, for sure, when things have been going badly, or if I'm having a crappy day, or I've got bad PMS, or whatever it is. But some people occupy that space more regularly than other people. And there's so much more to say on this question. It really is. We're sort of, a lot of this is in our book that's coming out next year. And my dissertation and my book after our book covers a lot of this ground. But it's definitely, you always want to be looking at behavior as sort of what problem are people trying to solve, and how are they trying to solve that problem through their genetic personality. So we've talked before about personality being very genetic. It's not their fault that they're disagreeable and that they see the world a little more pessimistically than you do. That's how people are wired. But there is this kind of strategic use of the environment to get what they want more of the time.
Right. And so from the standpoint of health coaching, this is pretty tough stuff. So the Jen and I have a host of strategies that are aimed at this problem. That doesn't mean they're magic. And so if you are a therapist in this arena, coach, which is the same thing, you can expect that this is going to be frustrating, and that you're going to be running up against a wall a bunch of times. And so so don't despair over this. And at sort of conventional therapy and therapeutic approaches are not likely to be effective at all. We have some secret sauce that is that can be helpful. It's not going to be magic, but worry about this problem later. When our book comes out, you will see the detailed logic of this and how to approach it clinically, because that's a big reason why we're writing this. But for now, just suffice it to say that you're not doing anything wrong as a therapist if you feel like you're running into something that appears not solvable. That would not surprise me at all. And don't despair over it, and minimize your effort and angst about this, because essentially that's like a storm down in the Gulf that's swirling, and it has a tremendous amount of momentum, and it's going to keep swirling, you know, until essentially it hits a landfall and that breaks it apart. And that's kind of what Jen was describing, and that is that it will continue unless the circumstances change that force the individual to adopt a different strategy that essentially by force, that they actually have to abandon that strategy. This is usually they don't have to abandon that strategy. So hence 25 years of psychoanalysis. If you've got enough money, that therapist will keep that storm swirling all the way down.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is actually, that points to the important principle of the difference between you as a coach who's trying to solve a problem and move a person ahead rather than keeping them in the eye of the storm. So those are two different jobs. And so a traditional psychotherapist who's like, well, come back next week and we'll continue talking about how bad the weather is. That's different than, we've got this problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to move you forward in life. And that can be very frustrating if you've got somebody who wants to stay in the storm. And so in the coaching role, and in sort of results-oriented psychotherapy, which is not most psychotherapy, but it is the kind of work that we do, you are going to run against the limitations of the personality sometimes. And so that what Doug is saying about don't take that too personally. Don't think that there's something, wrong with your recommendations or your program, because you are going to run into people who are just not ready to make that action leap into changing their circumstances because the cost benefit is not there. They want to continue in the storm. So learn to recognize that and not let it ruin your day.
There you go. Perfect.
Nice. Melissa says Dr. Howk for president, and Karen says, and you guys know Melissa, and Karen says, can Dr. Howk help somebody who wants to become more optimistic? I really want to work on being less negative and complaining less.
Yeah, I mean, we can't change your personality. So your personality is absolutely genetically, set in stone, more or less, but we can shift your perspective on things, open you up to different possibilities in the world, just kind of sort of manufacture that field of possibilities that is usually what accompanies just inherent natural optimism. So a lot of times people will feel very pessimistic because they just haven't seen, they're just looking at a tiny little piece of the picture, and they need somebody to illuminate other possibilities for them, and that will naturally move their optimism in pace with those possibilities. So that sort of thing we can definitely help with. I can't change you to be sort of more of a Pollyanna just genetically, though.
The thing about Jen is she thinks what I'm thinking, except that she says it better.
Sometimes you say what I'm thinking much better. So it's a good reciprocity.
I feel like I'm the composer. Like I wrote that, I wrote it that she could play it better.
Richard Dawkins wrote it.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice. Well, first I have to thank Sarah Vreed for the super chat donation. Very much appreciated. Yay. See, when I have guests, certain guests just bring out the generosity of people. So 2 questions. Do you want me to go to the one on self-esteem or the one on COVID? It's really up to you guys.
I don't know. Let's go to self-esteem.
Okay. All right. This is from Faith. Can you ask him what the best first steps are to help someone build self-esteem?
Yeah, let me explain. There's a lot of confusion about what self-esteem is. So let's make sure we understand what we're talking about. People are, this is such a definitional problem that I go back and forth in my own life about what I'm going to do about it. And so, because I know that the world is completely confused about what self-esteem is, even the feeling that I'm talking about. The self-esteem is not the same thing as self-confidence. Self-confidence is an entirely different phenomenon than self-esteem. The self-esteem is a feeling of moral rightness. It is a feeling that arrives when your internal audience watches your efforts and signals to you that they are respectful of the efforts that you are putting in. Self-confidence is a feeling that takes place when you have evidence that you are going to be successful in competition. Those are completely 2 different things. When they come together, it's ideal. So, for example, an Olympic an Olympic athlete that is working diligently every day, and he or she can watch their times in the pool, and they can see that they're struggling, and sometimes they're going forward and going back. And over this year, they see that, the coaches look at their tapes and they see where there could be problems, and they do a computer analysis of their technique. And then they get a specialized coach to change part of the technique, and then they work diligently to change the technique. And then they look at the times, and they see that the times are slightly improving. Now, what is this process? The process is the individual is working super diligently to do the very best they can. Through that process, sometimes it looks like they're making improvements, and sometimes it doesn't. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, when they arrive at the Olympic Stadium and they're going to compete, their confidence may not be high. In other words, they may feel like, you know what, from everything I can tell, I'm looking at probably 6th place. Okay, so that's probably where I'm at. So they're not brimming with self-confidence at all. However, their self-esteem can be superb because they feel like I've done everything that I can do. Okay, I have worked extremely hard. They can have a tremendous feeling of pride that they have done an outstanding job and they've made the most of their native abilities. Okay. When they swim to the best of their ability, and they come in 7th. Okay, now, are they disappointed? There's some disappointment, but they look at their time. Guess what? It's the 3rd best time that they ever did in a pool. And they're going to have a great deal of pride. Pride is the natural derivative. That is a part of the feeling of self-esteem. It's essentially the most impactful feeling that you get out of self-esteem. The other side of self-esteem is self-loathing and disgust. That's when you didn't do the work. That's when you chose to be self-indulgent and eat fried chicken and skip practice. Okay, that's when your self-esteem comes from essentially an internal audience that is watching your efforts and judging you as if other people are watching your efforts. Okay, and so now you may be self-indulgent and your self-esteem really isn't that hard on you. It's like, okay, it's mediocre. Your self-esteem doesn't necessitate that you do world-beating effort. But it will, if you have important competitive problems, like, for example, you're trying to lose 50 pounds, and it's important to you socially, you know that this would be a big deal to you. You know that it's necessary for you to compete in whatever arenas that you're competing for. So let's suppose that you're trying to be head counselor at a weight loss clinic. It would be pretty important for you to lose that 50 pounds. And so as a result, if you had started to gain 20 pounds, we would expect that your self-esteem mechanism would be pretty disgusted with you. And you would be giving you the internal feedback of, what the hell is this? Why are we being self-indulgent here? What is your answer for why it is that you're doing this? That is the self-esteem mechanism, basically raising an alarm that you are on a bad competitive path. We will also expect that your self-confidence is reduced, because if you were trying to get that promotion and now you realize everybody can see that you have gone backwards, that your self-confidence is also taking a hit. Now, people confuse these two things as if they're the same thing. They are not. They're actually two completely independent feelings. We actually, in our language, we say that they're the same thing. Okay, where it's like, oh, give them an award, or like, oh, I just got 3 job offers. That's good for my self-esteem. It actually has nothing to do with your self-esteem. The 3 job offers have to do with your self-confidence. That's a completely different issue. The self-esteem was what it took to, what process did you go through to get ready to apply for those jobs? Did you do an excellent job? If you did a so-so job, on everything and you got the job offers anyway, your self-confidence mechanism is like, hey, what the hell? Okay, you're pretty happy, but you are actually not full of pride. Pride is only going to come as a result of earning the self-esteem. That's why on our website, the quote is, happiness comes from earning esteem in the right way from the people that matter. The most important person that you get happiness from is earning self-esteem. Earning esteem from yourself is actually the most important audience that there is. Okay. So what are the steps to earning self-esteem? What is the secret? There is no secret. The secret is that you are the only person that you can earn self-esteem from. There's no other way to do it. Other people may cheer you and give you a lot of feedback, and that may feel good, but that's not self-esteem. That's esteem. They may signal to you that they're going to hire you because they think you're wonderful because of something that you did or that they thought that you could do. That's esteem. That influences your confidence, and that can feel very good, but that's not the same thing as self-esteem. Okay? Self-esteem is the only source of happiness that we have any control over. You don't have control over how confident you're going to be when you face competitive problems. You have no control over that at all. You have no control over whether or not you're going to get positive feedback from other people for whatever work you do or what, your self-presentation. You have no control over that at all. The only thing you have control over is your self-esteem. And the control that you have over your self-esteem is entirely different than the control that modern psychology thinks you have. It's actually completely opposite. Modern psychology thinks you have control over your self-esteem mechanism by talking back to your critical thoughts inside your head. In cognitive therapy, they call it talking back to the internal critic. Okay? It's also self-affirmation. Okay? No, that isn't how you influence the self-esteem mechanism. Self-esteem mechanism is not subject to propaganda. The self-esteem mechanism arrives out of your own internal audience watching your diligent efforts or watching you do mediocre effort or watching you do minimal effort or doing decent effort. Your self-esteem mechanism is a grade as opposed to your appropriate diligence in search for improvement. That's what it is. If you earn a B, it's giving you a B. If you earn a D, it's giving you a D. If you earn an A+, it's giving you an A+. It cannot help but give you an A+. It's an automated neurological device, okay? There is no other way to get an A+. You can't get an A+ through mediocre effort, even if you have spectacular results. You can get self-confidence and you can get esteem and you can get a lot of wins in the world, and that will give you happiness. But you weren't in control of that happiness. Other people's feedback was the controlling factor. The only happiness mechanism that you have control over is the indirect control of the self-esteem mechanism. You can't talk the self-esteem mechanism into giving up self-esteem to you. All you can do is do diligent, excellent effort. If you do diligent, excellent effort, then the self-esteem mechanism has to give you self-esteem, and it will. Okay? So the beauty of this insight is to know that you have 100% indirect control over the most important source of your own happiness, which is the self-esteem mechanism. That's what you have, okay? It turns out that if you take advantage of that fact and diligently work as best you can at whatever self-improvement or project that you are after, what will also happen is your self-confidence mechanism will watch your improvements, okay? And the self-confidence mechanism will also be a source of increased satisfaction and excitement in the system. But what I want people to do, the only secret I know of this, is to understand and cleave in your own mind that there are two different sources of happiness, and they're actually quite different. One of them is the self-esteem mechanism, the feeling of rightness that I have earned the pride, that I've gotten pride because I earned it through my effort and my own internal system watched me earn it, okay? The other side is the self-confidence that comes with positive feedback. That's wonderful. Everybody loves applause. Everybody loves to see improvement on their times, okay, in the pool. That self-confidence mechanism says, look, we're 2 seconds better. And we can imagine now the girls going wild and having our picture on the cover of Sports Illustrated, okay? So that's the self-confidence mechanism, is imagining or receiving positive feedback. But that is an entirely different process that we're not in control of. We hope to get self-confidence, we hope to earn esteem, and we hope to be rewarded in personal relationships with other people as a result of success. But I'm telling you, you can't count on success. The one thing that you can count on is self-esteem. Self-esteem will come if you earn it. And that's the most important lesson that I've learned in my career. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, I hope that distinction is clear, as confusing as it is with our language. I almost wish those two words were radically different words, that they didn't have self in front of them, because they wind up confusing people. Everybody understands they want their kids not to have self-esteem. They want their kids to have self-confidence, because they want their kids to be successful, because if they're successful, then they're going to be independent, and they're going to be successful in mating and successful in climbing dominance hierarchies and winning relationships. So they want their kids to be self-confident. They love to see the self-confidence, because those are indications of success. They're not thinking about self-esteem. Okay? Self-esteem comes from the kid studying diligently and then earning whatever the hell it is that they get honestly. Self-confidence can come with the fact that everybody's bragging about them, you know what I mean, because they got a good grade. Screw the grade. What I care about is the self-esteem that came from their diligent, excellent effort. Focus on that process, and let's not worry about it. In other words, it's all about what we call process over outcome. Okay? All right, Jen, how was that for a rant?
No, it's beautiful. That was beautiful. I love that. There's really some really good little pearls of wisdom in there that I'd never heard you say just that way before. So that was great. Yeah, as a parent, if you're in the position where you're thinking you're going to go lobby the teacher, you know, you're the helicopter parent and you're going to go lobby the teacher to improve your child's self-esteem, you're actually undermining their self-esteem by going and trying to you know, advocate on their behalf in that way. And that's where that confusion of self-confidence and self-esteem is getting confused, and you are promoting the wrong direction, and you're depriving your child of that experience of actually going through the process and building it up from the ground. So yeah, it was a great set of examples, and hopefully really clear to people.
Good.
Nothing to add.
Okay.
Yeah, people loved it. You're everything has to be listened to twice, though. That's my opinion when you guys speak. So that's amazing. Well, we can end it here, or you could just briefly the COVID question was just basically, have you guys changed your position on that it's just a bad flu?
Oh, I think we know. It's a very bad flu. I think, and of course this remains to be seen, I think that this by far is the worst year we're ever going to see it. In other words, I believe that we're going to find that next year is a cakewalk compared to this year. I also believe that the evidence to me right now looks like it's in a pretty significant receding process, as it has demonstrated itself to do throughout Europe, for example. So the Italians and the French and the Spanish and the English didn't suddenly become ingenious 2 months ago. 2 months ago, COVID basically worked its way through their population, and they have essentially almost no deaths in the last 60 days. So the same thing will happen to the United States. We are not caught forever in a terrible tragedy that we're never going to get out of. It's amazing that the entire media seems to think so. And some very brilliant people seem to think so. I am personally astounded that that's what anybody's inferences are, based on what it is that we see all over the world, where other places have watched the virus go through a population, and then there's essentially a natural immunity level that takes place when a virus works its way down to zero or close. So I think that COVID is, this is a one-time major price that our species had to pay for a virus that it wasn't well prepared for. Again, our position hasn't changed very much in that the average age of the average victim is over 80 years old. The more people have died over 80 than have died under 80. Very few people that are under 70 years old have died of the virus. Almost nobody in the world that is under 40 dies of the virus. It's essentially zero probability. And so the virus is essentially an evolutionary stressor to a population. In other words, evolutionary stressors tip over the weakest people, the weakest animals in a population. This is not, it's a pretty big, expensive thing. But when you talk about the total amount of years or days per life lost to COVID in the population of human beings on Earth, the days of average individual losing life to COVID is almost none. In other words, very, very few days per capita are being lost to this. Quite a bit days. There will be less days of life lost to COVID than will be days of life lost to the flu probably this year. Okay, so from that perspective, as a mathematician and an actuary, it is no worse than a bad flu if we compute it from that mathematical perspective, which is a very accurate scientific method of doing it. I think we can see that it in terms of its widespread impact and how many people it bumped into the grave. I think we can see that it was worse than a bad flu this year, but it's a one-time shot, and that's how I believe this is all going to play out. Jen, thoughts on that? Does that make sense?
No, I would just point people, if they're curious, you did the full podcast not that long ago, devoted to primarily COVID discussion. So for even more in-depth, walking through the numbers and everything, people can go back maybe 3 podcasts ago, maybe 4, within the last month or so.
Got it. I forgot about that. Yeah. No.
Yeah. And I would also we were never, I just, my disagreeable hackles get up a little bit when people try to paint us as part of the COVID denier cabal. Like, we've never denied that it is brutal and that it is a very, very nasty experience and you don't want to get COVID. We are pro masking. We're not in the conspiratorial denier camp. So I just want to make that clear to people before they lump us in with that. So.
You're not only pro-masking, but your masks match your dog's scarf.
They do. I have fabulous synchronized costuming going on over here.
Cheryl, who's watching live, says it's podcast number 234. Thank you, Cheryl.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Cheryl.
Okay.
And people want to know when they can expect the book. And is the title Esteem Dynamics?
No.
We're still deciding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Deep secret, but we will. It's sometime next year. We just don't know when. If Jen will just get something done.
I see. That's the current narrative. We got somewhat derailed. We were supposed to be writing this summer in Hawaii. That was the whole point of moving to Hawaii, and our move was delayed by several months because of COVID. And now, of course, Doug is back on the mainland, and so we're continuing to be bumped out from our intense writing time. But we're looking to be probably finishing the bulk of the writing this late fall and winter, and then editing and making sure people can catch our grievous errors and getting it out to the world next year.
Yeah, and if you guys sign up at esteemdynamics.com to be a member, I think it's like $99 for a lifetime, and you'll get a signed copy of the book. So everybody head over to esteemdynamics.com and sign up. And if you want a private consultation, because some of the questions, guys, I'm sorry, but these are consults. I can't ask questions that are like 8 paragraphs. It's not fair. So you guys do need to book a consult, and they're fabulous. Trust me, I've had them. They are so inspiring and enlightening. Guys, thank you so much. And guys, they'll be back on the 15th of October. So if you didn't get your questions answered, you have another chance, or join their community where they'll do a couple of live Q&As every month. So thanks again, Dr. Lisle and Dr. Howk. We always love having you guys on the show.
Oh, it's great to see
you. It's a pleasure, AJ. Good to see you.
Thank you. And guys, thank you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow at 11 o'clock when I'll be having my teacher from culinary school, Chef Elena Love, showing us how to make sauerkraut. Because at 2 p.m., we have Dr. Vanessa Mendez, a plant-based gastroenterologist, who's going to tell you why you need to eat these fermented foods. Take care, everybody. Bye, Dr. Lisle and Dr. Howk.
Have a good one. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.